There's a 40-foot monument to bad decisions and cheap champagne blocking my private driveway. It's a monstrosity of a party bus wrapped in garish chrome vinyl, and it's parked squarely across the gravel road that leads from the county blacktop to my ranch house, a mile back. This road, my road, is the only way in or out. And right now, it's being used as the grand entrance for an unauthorized neighborhood unity festival organized by the new HOA from the subdivision that sprang up next door a few years back. The architect of this particular masterpiece of petty tyranny is a woman named Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions Committee. My name is Jack, and for 30 years, I've worked this land. My life is about the rhythm of the seasons, the health of my cattle, and the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work. I value my privacy and my peace, which is precisely why I never sold this stretch of land to the developers who built the cookie-cutter estates that now border my western fence line. They got their suburbia, and I kept my sanctuary. But Karen, she saw my ranch not as a home or a livelihood, but as an undeveloped backyard for her pristine community. What she and the rest of the HOA board didn't know was that a rancher's most valuable tool isn't his tractor or his branding iron. It's his patience, followed closely by his intimate knowledge of every last property marker, easement, and county ordinance. They thought they were dealing with a simple farmer they could easily push around. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Have you ever had a neighbor who thought your property was just an extension of their own? This story is for anyone who's ever had to draw a line in the sand, or in my case, in the gravel. My first attempt at a resolution was, I thought, the neighborly thing to do. I walked the quarter-mile from my fence line to the epicenter of the chaos. Music was blaring from speakers set up near the party bus, and a gaggle of residents in matching polo shirts milled around a folding table laden with plastic cups and store-bought cookies. Karen, holding a clipboard like a royal scepter, was directing two men who were trying to unfold a bouncy castle. I waited for a lull in her stream of commands. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice even. She turned, a plastic smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Jack, so glad you could join us. Isn't this fantastic? We're building community." I gestured back towards the road. "It's a nice thought, but you've completely blocked my driveway. That's my only access to the main road. I've got a feed delivery coming this afternoon, and more importantly, if there was an emergency, no one could get in or out." Her smile tightened. "Oh, don't be such a fuddy-duddy. It's just for a few hours. The feed truck can wait. We're fostering togetherness." I shook my head. "That's a private road on my property. You're trespassing, and you're creating a serious safety hazard. You need to move that bus now." Her expression curdled from condescending sweetness to outright hostility. "Listen, sweetie," she began, her voice dripping with venom. "This little patch of dirt might technically be yours, but you are part of a community now. Your private road is an eyesore, and for one day, it's serving a greater good. The bus stays." She turned her back on me, a clear dismissal. That's when she made her second mistake. She spoke into a small walkie-talkie. "Security, we have a non-resident causing a disturbance. Please escort him back to his property." A moment later, two teenagers wearing yellow event staff vests approached me hesitantly. I just looked at them, then back at Karen's triumphant smirk. She was escalating. She was trying to humiliate me. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a neighbor and started thinking like a rancher defending his territory. I gave the teenagers a polite nod, turned around without a word, and walked back toward my house. My plan was no longer about just asking nicely. Back in my office, surrounded by cattle pedigrees and land deeds, my frustration began to cool and solidify into cold, hard strategy. The first thing I did was pull out the official survey map of my property. It was a beautiful, detailed document, a cartographer's love letter to my land, with every boundary line, every easement, and every right-of-way marked with unassailable precision. I ran my finger along the western edge, where the new subdivision was. Just as I knew, my property extended a full 50 feet beyond my fence, encompassing the entire gravel road and the grassy shoulders on both sides. The party bus wasn't just blocking my drive. It was parked entirely from bumper to bumper on my land. The second thing I did was pick up the phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I called Sheriff Brody. Brody was an old-school lawman who'd been sheriff in this county for 20 years. He knew my family, he knew my ranch, and most importantly, he had a simmering, deep-seated dislike for the petty politics and entitlement that had arrived with the new housing development. "Jack," he answered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Don't tell me those HOA commandos are at it again." I chuckled. "Worse than usual, Brody. They've blockaded my road with a party bus for some shindig. I asked the head lady, Karen, to move it. She refused, called me a non-resident, and tried to have me escorted off my own land by a couple of kids in security vests. There was a long, weary sigh on the other end of the line. "A party bus, huh? That's a new one. I've had 3 calls this month alone about them measuring lawn heights and fining people for having the wrong shade of mailbox." This was my aha moment. The sheriff wasn't just a neutral enforcer. He was an ally who was as fed up as I was. "Brody," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. "It's not just trespassing. It's a fire code violation. It's blocking the only egress for a residence. What are our options here?" He was silent for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "Well, Jack," he said slowly, a hint of steel entering his voice, "I reckon we have a few. Let me make a call of my own. Don't go anywhere." The plan that Sheriff Brody and I formulated over the next 10 minutes was a thing of simple, beautiful, and entirely legal elegance. He confirmed what I already suspected. Blocking the sole access road to a residence is a non-negotiable, towable offense, especially when it poses a clear fire and medical emergency risk. The fact that they were on my private property made it an open-and-shut case. "Here's what we'll do, Jack," Brody said, his tone now decidedly more cheerful. "I'm dispatching a deputy to officially assess the situation. Once he confirms the blockage, I'm calling in a heavy-duty tow, the biggest one we've got. And we're not just going to move the bus. We're going to impound it." I could hear the smile in his voice. "But where would you impound a vehicle that large, Brody?" I asked, playing my part. "Well," he replied, the trap now fully set. "The county impound lot is clear on the other side of town, and they charge by the mile. That's going to be a hefty bill for the bus company. But, the HOA has that big, pristine common area right by their fancy clubhouse. It's technically HOA property, so it's not a public street. If the bus were to be relocated there, it would be off the public right-of-way and no longer a county problem. It would become an internal HOA matter. The sheer brilliance of it was breathtaking. We weren't just going to remove the problem. We were going to deliver it directly to their doorstep, wrapped in a bough of their own making. It would turn their symbol of defiance into a massive, immovable monument to their own arrogance, right in the heart of their manicured paradise. Meanwhile, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon, Karen was in her element. From my porch, I could see her directing a 3-legged race, her laughter carrying on the wind, absolutely confident in her victory. She believed she had put the simple rancher in his place. She had no idea that she was no longer in a squabble with me. She was in a standoff with the county sheriff, and she had brought a party bus to a fight with a tow truck. My final act before the cavalry arrived was to create an unshakable digital paper trail. I took out my phone, opened up a new text message to Karen. Her number was proudly displayed on the Neighborhood Unity Festival flyers that had been smugly tucked under my mailbox, and composed a carefully worded message. "Karen," I wrote, "this is Jack. For the final time, I am formally requesting that you immediately move the bus that is illegally blocking my private drive at my address. It is a fire and safety hazard, and you're trespassing. If it is not moved within the next 15 minutes, I will have it towed at the owner's expense. All further communication on this matter should be directed to Sheriff Brody at the County Sheriff's Department." I hit send. I saw her glance at her phone a moment later, read the message, and then let out a derisive laugh, showing it to another HOA member. She typed a quick, dismissive reply, "Don't threaten me. We're not going anywhere. Learn to be a good neighbor." I saved a screenshot. That was her last chance. She had been warned, she had refused, and she had done it in writing. From my porch, I watched the party continue, a surreal spectacle of suburban hubris. They were grilling hot dogs, playing cornhole, and blissfully unaware that their glorious chariot was about to be repossessed in the most public way imaginable. I felt a calm settle over me. This was no longer about anger. It was about consequences. It was about the simple, immutable law of cause and effect, a law that governs life on a ranch, and, as it turned out, in a petty HOA. Karen had sown the wind with her arrogance, and now she was about to reap a whirlwind powered by a V8 diesel engine and a very annoyed sheriff. The 15 minutes passed. Then, in the distance, I heard it, the low, unmistakable rumble of a heavy-duty truck. The arrival was cinematic. First came Sheriff Brody's cruiser, lights off, cruising slowly down the county road before turning onto the shoulder near my drive. He didn't park with aggression, but with an air of official observation. A few of the partygoers noticed, pointing and murmuring, but Karen, ever the confident host, waved a dismissive hand as if she had personally ordered a police presence for her event. Then came the tow truck. It wasn't a standard flatbed. It was a wrecker, a leviathan of steel and hydraulics designed to haul semi-trucks out of ditches. It was painted a thunderous dark blue and bore the name Goliath Recovery. As it pulled up behind the party bus, its sheer size seemed to suck the air out of the celebration. The pop music suddenly sounded tinny and ridiculous. The bouncy castle looked pathetic. The driver, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and a no-nonsense expression, got out and surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on the bus with the detached professionalism of an undertaker sizing up a coffin. Sheriff Brody got out of his car and walked over to me, standing on my side of the gravel road. He just nodded. Afternoon, Jack, the deputy he dispatched, a young man named Evans, was already walking the perimeter of the bus, taking notes on a clipboard. The party was faltering. People were putting down their paper plates, their conversations dying out as they all turned to watch the unfolding drama. Karen finally seemed to realize this wasn't part of her plan. Her face, which had been flushed with social triumph, was now pale with confusion and a flicker of anger. She strode toward the sheriff, clipboard in hand, ready to assert an authority she didn't possess. "Sheriff, what's the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have a permit." Brody looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, I see no permit, and even if you had one, it wouldn't allow you to block a private emergency access route. This vehicle is being towed." The moment Sheriff Brody uttered the words, "being towed," the atmosphere shifted from a party to a public spectacle. Karen's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, indignation, panic, and finally, pure rage. "You can't do that," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the bus. "That's for our event. It's private property." The Goliath recovery driver, who had clearly seen this show before, ignored her completely. He began methodically unspooling massive chains and rigging from the back of his wrecker. The clanking of heavy steel was the only sound, a stark counterpoint to the fading party music. Each metallic clang was like a nail being hammered into the coffin of Karen's authority. "Actually, ma'am," Brody corrected her, his voice patient but firm, "it's parked on his private property." He gestured toward me. "And I'm not towing it. The property owner is. My deputy and I are just here to keep the peace while he remedies a trespassing and safety violation issue." This was the masterstroke of the plan. It framed me not as a vindictive neighbor, but as a citizen exercising his rights under the protective watch of the law. It completely stripped Karen of her narrative. She couldn't paint me as the villain when the sheriff himself was validating my actions. She whirled on me, her eyes blazing. You did this. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. We'll sue you for everything you have." The tow truck driver was now expertly maneuvering the huge forks under the front axle of the party bus. The hydraulics hissed to life, a powerful, determined sound. The front wheels of the bus lifted off the ground with a groan of protesting metal. The symbol of her power was now hooked, helpless, and at the mercy of a man she had dismissed just an hour earlier. The crowd of residents was silent, watching, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. They weren't looking at Karen as their leader anymore. They were looking at her as the person who had started a fight she was now spectacularly losing. The climax was less of a bang and more of a slow, grinding, hydraulic lift of justice. As the front end of the 40-foot bus rose into the air, Karen let out an involuntary gasp. Her entire event, her grand statement of community control, was literally being dismantled before her eyes. She turned to me, her voice a mix of pleading and fury. "Put it down. You can't just take it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply walked over to a small, unassuming metal stake in the grass, nearly hidden by a patch of clover, just a few feet from the bus's front tire. I tapped the top of it with my boot. "Karen," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. "This is a survey marker. It's been here for 50 years. It marks my property line. As you can see, your entire festival, including this bus, is on my land." I pulled my phone out and showed her the screenshot of her text message. "And this is where you were officially notified of your trespassing and refused to comply." Sheriff Brody has a copy as well. The color drained from her face. It was the irrefutable, physical proof of her error, right there at her feet. The evidence wasn't in a courtroom. It was the very ground she stood on. The sheriff stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, at this point, any further interference would be considered obstruction. I suggest you step back." Her shoulders slumped. Defeated. The residents watched, mesmerized, as the Goliath recovery driver expertly began to pull the massive bus off my road and onto the county blacktop. He didn't just drag it. He maneuvered it with a surgeon's precision. Karen's last-ditch effort was a weak cry to the bus rental company's name emblazoned on the side. "You can't let him do this. We rented you." But it was futile. The driver was following the orders of the law, not the frantic demands of a client who had caused the problem. Her power had completely crumbled. In the space of 20 minutes, she had gone from the queen of the neighborhood to a public fool, exposed by a quiet rancher and a metal stake in the ground. The downfall was a slow, majestic parade of humiliation. The tow truck didn't speed off. Instead, with Sheriff Brody's cruiser leading the way as an official escort, it proceeded at a stately pace down the road, past the entrance to the subdivision, and turned into the pristine, landscaped gateway of the estates at Willow Creek. I stood on my property and watched. The residents who had been at the party followed on foot, a somber procession watching their festival's centerpiece being led to its final resting place. The tow truck drove right past the perfectly manicured lawns, past the identical mailboxes Karen was so fond of regulating, and stopped directly in front of the community clubhouse and pool, the crown jewel of the HOA. With another hiss of hydraulics, the driver gently lowered the party bus right in the middle of the circular driveway that serviced the main entrance. It blocked the clubhouse. It blocked access to the pool's parking spaces. It sat there, a 40-foot-long, chrome-wrapped monument to Karen's hubris, effectively shutting down the HOA's own central hub. The driver unhooked the chains, handed a thick stack of paperwork to the stunned HOA president who had rushed out to see what the commotion was, and tipped his cap to Sheriff Brody. The bill, as Brody later told me, included the tow, a hefty after-hours emergency call-out fee, mileage, and an impound/storage fee for the first day, payable by the HOA since they were the organizers of the event that caused the violation. The bus company, furious that their vehicle was now impounded on-site at another client's property, immediately began billing the HOA for every hour it was out of service. Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the chaos she had unleashed. Her phone began to ring, then buzz incessantly. It was the HOA president. It was other board members. It was the bus company. She was no longer a leader. She was the sole architect of a logistical and financial nightmare. In the days that followed, the silence from my side of the fence was beautiful. The party bus sat in front of the HOA clubhouse for 3 full days, a constant, glaring reminder of Karen's spectacular failure. It took that long for the HOA board, the bus rental company, and their respective insurance agents to untangle the legal mess of who was responsible for paying the tow bill and the mounting rental fees. The final cost, I heard, was in the thousands, an expense that had to be explained to every single resident in a very awkward emergency HOA meeting. Karen was, of course, the star of that meeting. She was stripped of her position on the Covenants Committee and, from what I gather, became a pariah in the very community she had tried so desperately to control. She had wanted to build community, and she did. The entire neighborhood was now united in their frustration with her. My life returned to its quiet rhythm. The feed truck arrived without issue. The cattle grazed peacefully. The gravel on my road crunched under my tires, and no one else's. But something had changed. The HOA board sent a formal, written apology to me. The new head of the Covenants Committee, a retired engineer who valued clear boundaries, actually came over to introduce himself and assure me that my property line would be respected. The power dynamic had been permanently reset. They now saw the ranch not as an obstacle, but as a neighboring property with a steward who knew his rights and wasn't afraid to defend them. Looking back, it was never just about the bus. It was about respect. It was about the principle that rules and regulations written on paper are meaningless if they aren't grounded in common sense and basic decency. Karen confused her petty authority with actual power, as she learned the hard way that true power often lies with the quiet, patient person who knows exactly where the line is drawn. So what's the moral of the story? Know your rights, stand your ground, and never underestimate the simple, beautiful power of a well-placed survey marker. And if you have to, make sure you have the number of sheriff who's tired of the nonsense.